All right. So the panning trick I just did, that is a demonstration of what is called the Haas effect. H-A-A-S. Named after, of course, some guy named Haas. That Haas, I don't know, whatever you want to say it. But he was doing some research into stereo imaging and realized, hey, like time is part of this as well. We can manipulate stereo image using time, just like we can manipulate it using level. Well, and that kind of got a lot of us thinking. And eventually we realized that, oh, this is actually an example of a much more important phenomenon, which is this precedence effect, which happens with probably literally every sound we've ever heard in our life. Okay? What does that mean in the context of us in designing sound systems? Is that now that we understand that our audience has a blind spot in their hearing, we can exploit it. Okay? We can exploit it to the benefit of the show. If we understand that this is how, this is a psychoacoustic trick that is happening in our audience's brain. And it works, as far as we can tell, and there's been a lot of research into this, seems like everyone has this same blind spot, okay? We haven't found anybody yet that's like, yeah, that doesn't sound like that to me, okay? Everyone says, oh yeah, that sounds like that to me. So we can take this idea of, okay, if I hear it coming from here and I hear it coming from here at a different time, a little bit later, I will assume both sounds came from the first thing, and the sum of the loudness, when those two sounds come together, of course they get louder, I will not only think it's all coming from over there, but I will think it's coming from there louder than it naturally is. Okay, so there's that. And then we also understand that we are less sensitive to direction on the vertical axis. Okay, it's harder for us to determine the difference between sound coming from up here versus coming from here versus coming from down there, because in all three of those scenarios, the sound is hitting both of our ears at the same time, which makes it difficult for us to tell the difference there. There is some other information that we can rely on to help us figure out height, but we just don't have the same kind of resolution in figuring that as we have figuring things out on the horizontal axis. So when designing a sound system, sound reinforcement system, we can exploit both of those things, put them together, and we can create a really interesting effect. And the really interesting effect is that if you have, one of the nice things about theater is that usually we don't do it in ginormous rooms. Like we don't usually do theater in 20,000 seat venues where the audience is 400 feet away or something, right? We usually do it in smaller rooms, maybe 2,000 seats at the most. Usually, a Broadway theater is at least 1,000 seats, right? But not a whole lot more than that, okay? And the audience is never more than, 100, 150 feet away, maybe. And so even somebody that has a not very strong voice, if they just stand on that stage, even the person in the back row is going to hear them a little bit, right? It's not like you won't hear anything of their voice. You'll hear it. It might be a little quiet, but you'll hear it, okay? So now the issue is we hear it naturally. It's just that we don't hear it as loud enough or as clear enough as we would like. And so that's why sound designers were invented. Is because of this problem. We'd like to think that there was this golden age of Broadway when the singers were amazing and we didn't have to have sound designers. And you'll get this story told to you, over the course of your career many times. And it's an attempt to marginalize what you do and, and justify why you're doing a bad job at it, okay? But it's a completely false story. Because, and here's how I know it. Here's how I know that's a completely bogus story. Because if that time actually existed, if there really was this time when everything was perfect and singers were great and actors were awesome and rooms were amazing and audiences could hear really great and everything, if that really existed, then sound designers would never have been invented.
We would still have that.
Like that would still be there. The inconvenient truth is that there actually was no real golden age of sound on Broadway when we didn't need sound designers. It always sucked, and we just didn't have a way of fixing it until sound designers were invented. Okay?
And then the golden age of sound.
That's right.
Why did you get worse at your job?
Right. It's like, right, exactly. So I tend to sort of like push back a little bit on that narrative because it's just like, what's the point of that story? There's no point in that story at all other than, I don't know, what is the point? It doesn't, but anyway. Yeah, it's like whatever. So sound designers were invented, and we were invented first. Before we were invented to help tell the story, we were first invented to just make the stuff louder, okay? And then, like, while we were making stuff louder, they're like, hey, maybe you can help us tell the story too. And so what we are trying to do is take that actor that's standing on the stage, and we're trying to get the audience to hear that person a little bit louder, or maybe a lot louder. But usually it's just a little bit louder. And it would be super awesome, especially for these people who believe that story about the golden age when everything was amazing and there were no sound designers. Especially for those people, it'd be amazing if we could accomplish that goal of making it a little bit louder and have it still sound like it's coming from that person, okay? Some shows, that's the goal. Like whenever I do a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical or something like that, that's usually the goal, right? It's like, oh, well, we're going to try to make it sound like it's coming from there. On like Ragtime, we're not even trying. It's like, nobody cares. It's a modern musical. It was orchestrated with the brass playing as underscore to dialogue, and it's like, no one's assuming that that's all the actors. Okay, but what I mean is that this is a trick that you can do, but it isn't necessarily a trick that's appropriate or necessary for every show that you'll ever do. Okay, and I want to make sure you remember that. This isn't important all the time, but it can be important sometimes. But whether or not it is important for the story you're telling, you should still at least design your sound system using this idea, if for no other reason than it just sounds a little bit better, even if you don't actually get that effect of like, oh, it's not amplified, they're not wearing mics. It still sounds better even when you are, way higher than you could get the audience to suspend their disbelief, okay? And the idea being, could I get, if I have this actor on the stage doing whatever they do, and if the audience does actually hear all of that, could I make sure that the sound that comes out of the loudspeakers, that's the copy of their voice, could I make sure that that always hits the audience after they hear the natural sound? Is that possible? It is, actually, and it's tricky, but it's usually possible. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this now. Okay, and this is going to get a little hairy here, so just stay with me. Ask questions if you need to, because this is a very, very abstract. Like a lot of things in sound, you can't see it, so we're going to have to really think here to understand what's happening.
Put our brain caps on.
Put your thinking caps on.
Not brain caps.
Thinking caps, yes. All right.
Yeah, it's too early in the morning.
No, do you have another thinking cap I said?
Oh, no, I have a brain cap and I have a thinking cap. They're separate.
Oh, easy to say.
Let me scale this down a little bit. Scale it to decimal feet, because that'll make the math easier for us. There we go. All right, so here's everyone's favorite crappy theater, the Stevens Center. My explosion sound effect in Ragtime literally made a chunk of the wall fall off in the theater the other night.
Wait, really?
like I am dead serious.
The walls are falling apart already. That's true.
Like I did my explosion sound effect, and 5 minutes later, a piece of the wall fell off. Yes, during the show, big crash up in the balcony. Oh my goodness. So yes, the theater is literally crumbling.
You should play it louder and see how much damage you can do.
I should.
Maybe there'll be a flood and they'll have to replace it.
They've already closed the balcony, so
Wait, did they close it because it's like falling apart?
yeah.
Oh my god.
Because like literally the walls are falling down.
Yeah, that's why you can't go on like a little
Yeah, the balcony. Okay, so I'm going to put our little actor on the stage here. So there they are, standing on the stage, 5 feet up off the ground, because that's usually about where their head is, ish. What's that?
Maybe your own body. Like a little line, maybe. Yeah. Maybe a little dress. You know, like the triangles. That's actually really cool. Take a picture. This is what equality
Are you
looks
okay?
like.
No, I'm
That looks like a tripod.
so tired. This is just.
It does look like a tripod. We're folks did. Let's go watch Pulp Fiction.
There you go.
Wow,
All right.
you're an animator.
So there's your actor on the stage, right?
Amazing.
And I'm going to put our, I'm going to hang our center cluster right there. Okay? So there's my sound system, right? Now, yeah. So here's a secret. The best kind of sound system is the sound system that accomplishes the job with only one loudspeaker. Because that is the sound system that has the least amount of comb filtering. So that should always be your goal, is how close can I get to one loudspeaker? Okay? That's, like, I'm dead serious about that. Okay. So, yeah, I want to try that. Can I make this work with one loudspeaker? I want to see. So I'm going to put my audience here, the front row. I've usually put their heads about 4 feet off the ground. And then I'm going to put someone on the back row. Oops. Also 4 feet off the ground. And let's put the balcony into this equation, even though no one's allowed to sit there anymore. They used to be able to sit there. No, like there's literally a big net.
You could literally die.
There's literally a big net on the house left wall,
Yeah.
because like it's crumbling and falling apart.
Have you been to the eyebrow? Go to the eyebrow. Go up the spiral staircase. We went to the eyebrow. Yeah, it's falling apart.
All right, so here you go. So what I would like to do is I want to find out, okay, like how far away is that actor from all those places? Okay, so I'm going to pull out my trusty Excel here, and I'm going to say talker distance, because that's the first thing I want to know. Is the
So what are we finding? What's the purpose of?
Well, I'm trying to figure out when the sound from the talker hits each of those ears.
Okay.
And then I want to find out when the sound from the loudspeaker hits each of those ears. Before I can figure that out, I have to figure out how far away they are.
Yeah.
And then I can convert that distance to time.
And the throw of the speaker, right?
Um,
Or is there like a general?
yeah, we're not. This isn't about directivity, right? I mean, at this phase of the process, we're assuming you've already figured that out.
Oh, okay.
We're assuming you've already designed a sound system that achieves, those coverage goals for the audience, and now you're going to figure out time.
Okay.
Yes.
So if there were face mics on their ears, how would you calculate that df?
How far away is it from their face or from their mouth?
So we would just estimate?
Well, what, 6 inches maybe? So I'm just going to make a column here for each seat. You solve this problem from the point of view of the listener. It's very important, okay? Not the speaker, okay? So how far away is this talker from that listener? Well, they are 22.672 feet away. 22.672. Okay? They are 81.5481 to that seed. Okay. And they are 66.6462. 462 to that one. And they are 104.9977. 104.9977 to that seat. Okay. Now, how quickly will the sound get there based on that distance?
The equation, is it one to one? Or is it a little bit less than 1 second?
So sound travels 1,130 feet per second, according to the books, on average. It's a little bit faster than that here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. But in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, it's 1,050 feet per second.
Depending on the weather.
Yeah, depending on the weather and the humidity and the temperature and all that kind of stuff. But generally, I've measured it, and it's about 1,050. But you know, the average around the world is 1,130. So we'll use that. So yeah, the time is always going to be a smaller number than the distance, okay? Because it's 1,130 feet per second, or 1.13 feet per millisecond.
I was going to say it's 1.1 something.
So what this is going to do is I'm going to take this distance value and I'm going to divide it by 1.13. And that's time.
In milliseconds or seconds?
Milliseconds.
What did you divide? What was the first number?
The distance. Distance divided by 1.13 will get you time. I'll copy that over. So that is how long it takes for the actor's voice to get to each of those ears. Okay? It takes 20 milliseconds to get to the front row ears. It takes 93, almost 93 milliseconds to get to the back row balcony ears. Okay?
So is that how long you put your delay on?
Not necessarily. Let's figure out when the loudspeaker gets there.
Oh, right.
Right? So let's go from our center cluster to those ears, 33.4269. Okay, that's how far away it is. Now we'll go to this seat, 77.2897. That's how far away it is from that seat. Now this seat, 54.5231. And now to this seat, 91.7186. Okay, that's how far away the center cluster is from each of those seats. Now, how long does it take to make that trip? This will be the distance divided by 1.13. Okay? That's how long it takes for the sound from the center cluster to get to each of those seats. Okay? So now the question is, well, what's the difference between those two sounds at each of those seats? What's the difference in time? Okay? And I figure this out. I want to do center cluster minus talker. Because ideally, I want the talker to arrive first. Okay? And if the talker is arriving first, then when I do center cluster minus talker, I will get a positive number. Okay? So let's try that. So center cluster time minus talker time. Okay? No surprise, I get 9.5 milliseconds, meaning the talker's voice hits the front row ears 9.5 milliseconds before the center cluster. I didn't even have to do that math to tell you that their voice would hit the front row first, right? Because it's physically closer, right? There's less distance being traveled here as compared to the center cluster getting to those ears. So no big whoop, it works, right? Their voice is getting there first. Okay, let's check the other seats though. Okay, everywhere else, the center cluster is arriving first. I got negative numbers. Okay? So, meaning the center cluster is closer to those ears than the talker is. And
When you say talker hitting first, do you mean like not through the system? You just mean like the talker as a human being,
Yeah.
their voice hitting them?
exactly.
Okay.
And you can see that here, like the center cluster is physically closer to this front row balcony than that talker is. Like there's just less distance involved, okay? So,
Have to put a delay on it based on like the logic of if I'm this far away,
mhm,
take for it to get here.
exactly. So now here's the window that we're looking at to make this work. You know that if you hear two versions of the same sound slightly out of time, what happens? Yeah, but before today, what would have your answer been? Comb filtering, right? That's what happens when you hear the same sound more than once, but at a different time. Comb filtering. So, if any of you have been like making any connections right now, you're thinking, wait a minute, Jason, doesn't this just cause comb filtering? And the answer is yes, it does. It absolutely causes comb filtering. And we just accept that because we'd rather have a little bit of comb filtering and have it sound like it's coming from the actor than have no comb filtering and have it not sound like it's coming from the actor. Okay, so it's a trade-off here. But generally speaking, we have found that if that difference in time is greater than 5 milliseconds, then the comb filtering is not super noticeable. Okay, so we need all of these numbers to be greater than 5. And if all those numbers are greater than 5, then the actor's natural voice will be hitting the audience first, followed by the center cluster, and it'll be not sounding like it's comb filtering a whole lot, okay?
All numbers should be plus 5?
At least 5 milliseconds. But here's another problem. If the difference in time is too big, then we'll start to hear an echo. So there's also a limit to how much delay we can have. And that limit is a bit of a moving target. It kind of depends on the material. If it's something that's very transient, like percussion or something, you'll start to hear double around 18 milliseconds or something, right? But for someone's voice, singing or talking, you can push it to 30 milliseconds and still usually be okay. But much more than 30 milliseconds, and most people would start to hear a double echo, right? So we're looking for all of these numbers to be somewhere between 5 and 30 milliseconds. Dylan?
In this situation, if you're trying to like delay the speaker to someone, you're basically dealing at like 1 millisecond for each foot away they are from the actor.
That's kind of a shorthand for it because, you know, sound travels ish 1 foot per millisecond. And so, yeah, if you're trying to like, well,
Do it faster.
just really quickly estimate it in your head, how much delay should I add? Yeah, well, how far away are they? About 20 feet. All right, you know, just to make them hit at the same time would take 20-ish milliseconds, right? But we're not necessarily looking for them to hit the same time. We're looking for the sound system to come later, right? So we want more. In that scenario, we would want more than 20 milliseconds, right? So what is the amount of time I would need to add to that center cluster to make all 4 of these numbers greater than 5 but less than 30? Well, this one is plus 9, so I'm going to have to add at least 9 milliseconds plus 5. So I'm looking at least 14 milliseconds to get that front row to 5. Right? Sorry, this one.
I was gonna say, like, you mean the lowest?
Sorry, I was looking at that from the wrong end.
Okay, so 'cause if you
Minus 11
if you look at the lowest number and then get that to 5, then it changes up, then you're good, right?
should be.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Why would it not be good?
Well, if this was a bigger number,
Oh, and it was like more than 30.
then it might.
Okay.
So, yeah, so we're looking at, this needs to be 11 plus 5.
When you say 5 to 30, do you mean plus, like you can add up to 30, or the number should be 30?
It shouldn't, the result should not be more than 30.
Okay, so it doesn't have to do with the not.
You can add as much delay as you want. You're looking for the difference. Okay? So, in this case, I'm going to update my formula here and say center cluster minus talker, and plus the delay. Okay.
Dylan, me asking, how did you get 17?
How did I get what?
How did you get 17?
17, because minus 11.7, to turn that into positive 5,
Right?
I would need 17 milliseconds.
Oh, okay.
Right? So if I do that, oops, and copy this over, then I get here. Oops. Oh, right. Here's the trick. So because I did it, oops, because I just drug it, look what happened. This cell got incremented. So I don't want to do that. So here's the trick. If you put a little $ in front of both of those values, then it won't increment it.
That's crazy.
Okay, there you go. Okay, there you go. I have somewhere between 5 and 30 milliseconds at every seat. So this will work. And you're thinking, well, gee, Jason, that wasn't so hard.
I knew it was going to be more complicated, so I didn't say that. This can't possibly be it.
All right. Where is my talker standing?
On the stage.
Where on the stage? Just barely in front of plaster line, looks like, right? Are they going to be there the whole show? No, this is theater. They move all over the place, right? We hire.
The way they're going to change every single time they move, the delay's
Yeah.
going to change.
Yes. We tend to hire choreographers for shows, and choreographers, their whole job is to make people move all the time.
Yeah.
And our thing only works if they stand still.
Well, now I don't understand. That's impossible. You can't just change the delay every single time someone moves a foot.
Right.
Why not?
So that sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot, but it's also hard to calculate every position on the stage that they
You
move.
make them go all the way to the back and then like find an average.
Dylan, what do you think?
Dylan?
We're dealing with this on Passing Strange, because like most of the show takes place like upstage, and then one part they go all the way back, and if we delay too much when they're in the front, you immediately hear them starting
So
to
you
like
change
echo.
the delay based on where they are, like with the system?
We've made a compromise because that would be, because we could change it, but it
Can
would
you
take
do it
like,
too loud? What would you do?
it's just happening on board, because Sam would have to do something that would be very dangerous. Like we'd have to, if it goes wrong, we have to start from scratch. Apparently, is what Sam's described it to me as. So we've like made a compromise.
Could you not like
Plus it's a
in
rock
queue?
show. So.
What's that?
In a queue, could
I was
you
about to
not
say,
like
yeah, I was
the
gonna say you
cues
can do a QLab queue about delay.
Well, I mean like in your like
You do it in the console.
yeah, in your
Yeah.
console.
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
So you can make like a delay queue within the console.
yeah, I do that all the time. But you don't have to do that.
Because you can just, just to do that, are you making a scene and then putting delay on your scene?
I mean, usually in a musical, a complex musical, you're hitting that scene button like every half a page, you know, because you're changing VCAs anyway. So you can just add input delay to the scope of that. No problem. I do that all the time. But you don't have to do that. And there are people that do that, and that works. But you know, there can be a better way under certain circumstances. So let's try this again. Let's say that generally speaking, you know, this upstage half of the stage is probably going to be full of scenery. They're probably not going to put a lot of people there. Okay, usually. Although in ragtime they are. They have people up here in the air, like this far upstage, and it's killing me. But generally speaking, most of the important stuff happens here in this downstage half of the air. So I've put, and they tend to not stand right on the edge of the stage. They're usually a couple of feet back so they don't fall into the pit. Okay, so I'm just going to say, all right, can I make it work in this general window? Let's see what happens. So this is now going to be my downstage talker. Whoops. This will be downstage talker. And now I'm going to insert a couple of cells here. And we'll do upstage talker distance and upstage talker time. So I'm just going to do this whole thing again for that other spot and see how big of a problem I'm dealing with. Okay? So upstage talker distance. Let's see here. So upstage talker to front row, 43.0948. Okay. To back row orchestra, 102.1103. Front row balcony, 89.0929, or 85.0929. And back row balcony, 124.2191. Okay, now I'll convert that to time. That divided by 1.13. And we'll go from there. Now this is center cluster minus upstage talker. And now I want to do a center cluster minus, upstage talker. This is downstage talker. Okay? So this will be center cluster time minus upstage talker time plus my delay.
Can you say that again slower?
Yes. So this one, just like I did before, where I did my center cluster minus my talker plus my delay, I'm doing the same thing again, but this time it's center cluster time minus the new talker time, the upstage talker's time, plus the delay. So I'm just pretending that the actor moved. And I want to see how big of a problem I now have.
So minus, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I totally understand what you're doing. So what is the upstage talker time is the number above?
Yeah, upstage talker time is the time it takes for the sound from that talker to get to each seat.
And then why are you adding the delay?
Because the center cluster would be arriving later with my delay, right? Because this is the actual time for the center cluster without delay. That's just how long it takes it to travel through the air.
The delay to fix the problem, so okay.
Yeah. So I've added delay to fix the original problem, and I want to see if I still have a solution, right? And of course I don't. So I've got 3 seats that are now negative numbers.
So we gotta do the number thing again?
Yeah, so can I make this work now? I've got a negative 11.7. How much more delay would I need to add to make that work? Another 17. So what's 17 plus 17?
Y'all did that fast.
Yeah, no, I was like 15 plus 15.
34 milliseconds. You think that'll work? Okay, so that put that in 5. But now look.
But then that's
Now front row is hearing an echo when the actor stands downstage.
major echo.
Yeah. Okay, how successful do you think I'm going to be at getting the choreographer to not move them around? Right? not successful. All right. So what's the solution here? Dylan? Yeah. Well, by doing an average, you're basically saying you're acknowledging the fact that there's some times where it won't work. And I'd rather not do that. I'd rather not make that compromise.
Right all the time.
I want to be right all the time. Yeah.
Would you use automation then? Like some sort of
You could. So if you could keep track of where the actor is on stage, and you could automate delay based on where they move, then yeah, you absolutely could. And that's what things like Soundscape does that from DMV. Timax from Outboard does that. And
Physically move the speaker? Am I understanding this
just adds delay,
correctly?
It just adds a layer.
dynamically adds the delay.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, that's an option. It's a rather complicated option, but it is an option.
Wait, so the speaker, I'm sorry, I just don't understand. So the speaker changes, it doesn't move, it's changing the delay itself?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can like program a speaker to do certain things at a certain time?
Well, you're programming a processor. So you have a processor that feeds that loudspeaker, and it just hangs on to the sound for a little bit longer before it lets the loudspeaker
But
put it out
you
there.
guys have like delay?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
these are like time-based. You have to figure out when the act. So you have to do a whole bunch of
Yeah.
All the time?
like overcorrecting.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a pain in the butt. So that is a solution. It is not a particularly elegant solution, and it's a rather expensive and time-consuming solution. There is a better way that's much less complicated and much less expensive.
We're also doing the math for a system with just one speaker.
Ah, Courtney is figuring this out.
And I remember you mentioned front fills at the beginning of, you mentioned front fills last week, so I'm guessing you want to add front fills.
I do want to add front fills, but why do I want to add front fills? Let's think about this. This used to work. It used to work, right?
If you add a different variable, then you can solve the equation. Because if you add a speaker, then you can, you know what I mean? Like you can knock for that delay. And you can fix
It's even simpler than that.
Okay, so we're talking.
This used to work. 10 minutes ago, it worked. And it worked because the actor wasn't moving.
Right.
Okay.
And this is from the center cluster, correct? So we added like speakers that are like a little closer to like the audience. Wouldn't that be a variable with a whole delay?
You're so close, Jaden. You're so close.
The front fills, they're where the talker is.
Yes.
They don't move.
Yes. There it is. Okay. So if we can get a loudspeaker that's close to the talkers, then even though they're moving, we can keep that. Because what's killing us here is that the distance between the loudspeaker and the listener varies so greatly at each seat compared to the talker. But if I can get the loudspeaker close to the talker, then the difference in time between the talker and the loudspeaker will be consistent, right? At every seat, they will hear the same difference, whether they're front row balcony or front row orchestra, right? Because the geometry is such that the loudspeaker and the talker are not so far away from each other that the time difference is so great. But if I can get the loudspeaker close to the talker, then the time difference between the two stays consistent.
So you can't use one speaker.
Yeah, hardly ever can you get away with one speaker. I'm just saying, like, that still is the goal, right?
Yeah.
But
So you should, like, if you're designing a system, you should, like, start with one loudspeaker and then build your way up.
yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, okay.
Based on
Yeah,
what you-
Dylan.
So I'm trying to figure this. So in this situation, the front fill is now taking over, like for the front audience segment. That's taking over.
It's not.
It's not. So it's not. What I was thinking is, you're not just delaying them differently from each speaker. Okay.
No, here's the important thing about front fills. We don't put them in there. The reason we use them has nothing to do with the front 5 rows. You know, hopefully you're going to design a center cluster that hits the front row just fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're not putting front fills in because the front row can't hear it.
Yeah.
The front row is the closest to the show that they can possibly be. They could probably be just fine if you didn't show up to work. Okay? They don't need help. Okay? They're fine. They're 10 feet away from the actors. You know, it's fine. You're not putting those front fills in to help the front row. You're putting those front fills in to help the people in the back row.
Yeah.
Okay? And if you understand that, we call them front fills, and that's a bit of a misnomer. I would call them imaging fills. Maybe would be a better way of thinking about it. Because what we're trying to create is something that stands in for an actor that's not moving. Because when the actors move, that's when we have a problem. So we're going to have a loudspeaker pretend to be an actor on the stage that isn't moving around, and then we can make our time problem work. Jesse.
So if your actor's moving around and you have the front fill there, then don't you end up having issues where you have like a 1 to 5 to 10 millisecond delay between, like time difference between the front fill itself and the actual talkers? Like,
Yeah, we have to figure that out.
does that matter? Because I know that typically you're trying to make the sound reinforcement system be much louder than the talker itself. So does that just mask that issue entirely?
It is an issue that we have to figure out, and we're going to figure it out right now. All right, so I'm going to add a front fill, and let's now do this all again.
See if our lives are changed.
I love front fills.
Okay, now it's starting to make sense how people design the actual show now.
Okay, so this front fill to front row is 16.5795. what was it? 5795. 795. Okay. The front fill distance to back row orchestra, 764509. 4509. Front row balcony is 626161. And back row balcony is 1019431. Let's convert that to time. And we'll drag this over. Okay. Now I get to pretend, for a moment, I get to pretend as though the center cluster doesn't exist. Okay? Now we're going to solve this using front fills, as though the front fills is the only loudspeaker in our system. Okay? So I'm going to do the same thing again. But in this case, instead of center cluster minus talker, this is going to be front fill. And this is going to be front fill. And then I'm going to add a front fill delay that we will figure out in a moment. So now this equation is actually going to be front fill time minus downstage talker time. And we're going to reference the front fill delay instead. Okay? And now I will copy that over. Of course, those are all negative numbers. And this one will be front fill time minus upstage talker time plus front fill delay. And we will drag that over. Okay, look at that. I have all negative numbers, which is brilliant. Actually, that's great, because that makes it a heck of a lot easier to find a single delay value that'll make everyone work. Okay? So the worst case scenario here is looks like that one. So what would I have to add to make that be a positive 5? Probably 28 milliseconds. No, 29. Okay, look at that. It works everywhere for all 4 seats, whether the actor is standing all the way downstage or all the way upstage, or at least as far upstage as we're going to allow them to go. Okay, it works.
So does talker time not matter anymore?
It does.
No, we're using that. We're using talker time to figure this out. So we're doing front fills minus talker time. Okay, now here's the problem. Now we're getting to Jesse's question, and it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. We just learned that when you put the loudspeakers really close to the microphones, and the microphones are on the talkers, when you put the loudspeakers really close to them, you have feedback problems, right? Isn't this going to cause us feedback problems?
Well, it won't be facing the actor, though, no?
Okay, but to get a front fill to do what you need it to do, which is hit the back row, you need that little front fill to hit the back row. So this is going to be something that is not very directional. You need it to hit all the seats. Everybody needs to be able to hear this, just like everybody hears the actor. Okay? So front fills tend to be not very directional. They tend to be small because the pretty committee, and they tend to be really omnidirectional because we need them to go everywhere. Okay? So yeah, this is going to cause a gain before feedback problem. So we are not going to use this to get our gain. So we do not need to use the front fill to get a lot of gain. We don't need this to be any louder than the actors are all by themselves.
Well,
We just need this to hit first.
Exactly.
And so now, do we just have to get the center cluster within 30 milliseconds? of the
Yes.
front fill?
Yes. And we know we can do that, right? Because if we're saying the front fill is an actor that doesn't move, we already know we can make that work. Okay, so all we got to do is now solve this for the front fill in the center cluster, and then we can use the center cluster to get all our gain. Yes?
So I was just gonna say, so like if you're using front fills and like you're having someone ask you to turn it up or whatever, you're never turning up the volume of the front fills because that level is predetermined based on like you know what I'm saying?
Give me a minute and I'll answer that.
So,
Okay?
because we already found the delay of the talker through gestation
Yeah.
hear it back there.
Yeah.
We don't need the front fill to be super loud at all. It
No.
just needs to be a normal voice.
So the gain
Yes.
on the front fill is like actually really low.
Yeah.
While the center cluster has like a substantial amount of gain.
Yeah.
Because that's where we're okay.
You can usually get the front fills to be a little bit louder than the actor, but not by much. Just a few dB is all you need, and then it won't feed back, because by the time it gets through the air to their mic, it won't be the same level as their voice, and you'll be fine. Jesse?
So what is the relationship between, what does the relationship between the front fill and the center cluster need to be for that not to come filtered?
That's what we're going to find out. It's the same rule, interestingly enough. So now that we've solved this talker against the front fill, that's done. That works. Precedence works. We're going to think all that sound's coming from the actor. Okay? Now we go from front fill to center cluster. As long as the center cluster hits the audience with between 5 and 30 milliseconds after the front fill, then the front fill, or the center cluster images to the front fill, and the front fill images to the actor. So even if the center cluster is more than 30 milliseconds after the actor, it doesn't matter, because the front fill, or the center cluster images to the front fill. And then the front fill images to the actor, and our brains follow that daisy chain. Okay? We won't perceive that echo as long as the front fill is in the middle. If we turn off the front fill, then we'd hear the echo. Right? So let's try it now. Now we want to do center cluster minus front fill. So this is going to be center cluster time plus the center cluster delay, because that's, we're talking about the sum of those values, minus the front fill time minus the front fill delay. So we want to take the center cluster with its delay and subtract the front fill with its delay.
I thought you said center cluster delay. Center cluster time plus center cluster delay minus front fill time minus front fill delay.
Yep. You got it.
This is just a question. What are you using to make these equations kind of Excel?
Equals.
Okay, and then you can just select squares or
Yep.
Okay.
I'm going to.
Have an intensive arts like Excel workshop. That would be amazing.
So I put the dollar signs in front of those two delay values so that they won't move. And then I'm going to drag this over. And let me reset that to 0. And here's where I'm at now. Okay? So what do I need to do?
You're over 30 though.
Yeah, I am, aren't I?
You can't do that.
So I need to add some delay.
Yeah.
So,
So -7.
oh, it's not changing. Why is it not changing?
Well, that one changed -4.
Oh, wait.
One of them changed.
Oh, weird. What happened? What happened? Hang on, hang on.
Your equations got, or your cells got discombobulated.
Okay.
$dollar sign.
Yes, okay.
Oh, you did dollar sign.
Oh, I did it in the wrong place, didn't I?
Yeah.
Dang. The Excel certified person, no. What's it called? Excel certified? Yeah. Oh,
That's what I need right there.
Excel actually.
Google certification. Excel certification.
Is that as good as Dante's certification?
Yeah, basically. No one uses Access anymore.
All right, here we go. I'm not even going to do the math. I'm going to start adding time until I get the right numbers here.
When you refuse to do math.
Uh,
How would I do math if no have to? That wasn't Excel math. I did not.
there I am. Between 5 milliseconds and 30 milliseconds. Yes, Jesse.
So I think that the concept that you just explained, where like the front fills kind of mask the echo between the center cluster and the talker.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting and cool, but my question is, does that sacrifice intelligibility at all? Does that cause any kind of smoothing or blurring of what the talker is saying?
No, because our ear-brain system has developed a blind spot to not hear that.
Great, cool.
right? Because this is what we are creating artificially here is what we hear every day of our lives naturally. You are hearing my voice directly from my mouth to your ears, and you are hearing it bounce off the floor, bounce off the wall, bounce off the ceiling, bounce off the table, and it's all hitting you, and it's hitting you within these time windows, and therefore you don't hear the echo. And you're not hearing an intelligibility problem. The intelligibility problem becomes when you do have the echo, when those differences of time are too much. And that's when you have intelligibility problems. But if you're within the time window, it sounds great. So, look what I did now. Now I can answer Molly's question. Wait, now remind me what it was now.
Well, I also forgot.
Okay. It was, wasn't it about loudness level?
I think.
So that's what I thought it was. So this is what I was going to say next, is now we've got the time part working. Now what about level?
Oh, I remember what it was.
Yes.
I was asking about the front fills, and I was basically asking like if the only purpose of the front fills has nothing to do with volume and is only distance. And
Yes.
so like if there's ever a problem in the system.
Oh,
it's
yes, yes,
working,
yes.
like,
Perfect.
You're never pushing front fills.
Okay.
Like the answer.
Yes, okay, I did remember something about level. Okay, this is why I held off on you for a second, because I had to do this first. Now that we've done this, now we have to decide how loud do we make each of these loudspeakers, right?
Right.
We got the time part sorted out. Now what about the level part? Well, here's the rule of thumb.
So is level is based on purpose?
Level is based on level. It's just like how loud do you want it to be?
Yeah, but I just mean like I've never thought about speakers in the sense of like front fills are being used to mimic talker, and these are
Right.
up here's being used for this, and up here's being used, so like every single thing should have a very definitive purpose. That's
Sure.
the smallest sound system.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's the rule of thumb with precedence. Generally speaking, each arrival of sound that the audience hears, you don't, if you can help it, you don't want any one arrival to be more than 10 dB louder than the one that came before it. Once it gets more than 10 dB difference, you start to image up to the loudspeaker a little bit. Okay, so here's in the perfect world, you would hear the actor directly to your ears, and they would be however loud they are, and then you'd hear the front fill 5 to 30 milliseconds after that, and that would be no more than 10 dB louder. But maybe in a perfect world, it would be 10 dB louder, right? And then you hear the center cluster, and ideally in the perfect world, the center cluster would not be more than 10 dB louder than the front fill. But if you already got the front fill to be 10 dB more than the actor, now you're at 20 dB of gain. That's pretty good, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to set a balance. So what I do when I tune the systems, and this part you have to do by ear. Smart won't tell you this. Smart will help you figure out the timing. And once you get that figured out, then you just have to like listen. And what I'll do is I will either get somebody to sing if I have somebody there with a mic, or I'll put a little hotspot on a stick pretending to be an actor singing, or I'll just image to the front fills. But either way, I'll turn up the front fills. If I have a source on stage, I'll turn up the front fills as hot as I can get it and have it still sound like it's coming from the actor and not have to worry about feedback, okay? But usually I'm not getting a ton of gain out of that. And then I light up the center cluster and I turn that up as loud as I can get it and still be able to suspend my disbelief. And this is the important part. I know that the center cluster is part of this. And I know that the center cluster is louder. The audience does not know that. And you got to turn off your sound brain for a second, and you got to really listen and pretend you're an audience member. And it's like, am I willing to suspend my disbelief that all that sound isn't coming from that person, right? You keep turning it up and up and up until you're like, okay, there is no brain contortions I can make that would allow me to accept that that's what's happening. So, okay, great. Then I back it off a few dB, and then you're there. So you're trying to get gain. You want to get it as loud as you can, and still be able to be like, okay, I could accept that. I could accept that. Okay, how about 2 more dB? Yeah, I could accept that. How about 1 more dB? Nope, cannot accept that. Okay, great. We take it down. Keeping in mind that you want to get more gain, and this is the mistake I see a lot of sound people make. Is they're like, oh, well, it doesn't sound like. Yeah, I know, but you want it to be louder. So can you make it louder and then convince yourself that it's okay? right? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to talk yourself into more gain, talk yourself into more gain. Now, when the question is make the show louder, I just make the whole thing louder, right? Because I have a balance that works, right? Worst case scenario is I take the whole system up, and now my front fill is more than 10 dB louder, and therefore we're imaging to the front fills now instead of the actor. But the front fill is really close to the actor. And so that's okay. Like, I usually can get away with that, especially if you've EQ'd those front fills really well, which I had that problem in ragtime last week. I kept turning it up, and it was sounding so bad. I was like, what's going on? It sounds terrible. And I finally went down and sat in the front row, and I realized the front fill sounded horrible. Like, I don't know what had happened. Like, when we were tuning, we skipped over that part or something. But, you know, there was this weird 500 hertz, like, boost thing that was going on in there, and I just, like, carved that out with some EQ, and those front fills mellowed out a ton, and suddenly I could get more gain, and it sounded more natural. Because the front fill sounded more like the actor. And this, because I could turn up the system more and have it still sound natural, right? Didn't sound bad. And this is the third rule of thumb for precedence, is what comes out of the loudspeakers has to sound like what's coming out of those actors. And so that system tuning of the EQ and the frequency response and everything, you've got to get that right. Because if what's coming out of the loudspeaker doesn't sound like what's coming out of that actor, then your brain won't merge them together. If it sounds too different, your brain's like, those are two different things. Okay? So most of what I'm doing as a sound designer on the show is I'm EQing mics. I spend all week in tech EQing mics. Every time that person sings and we bring their fader up, I pull up their EQ and I'm boom, 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 as fast as I can, trying to get that mic to capture their voice and send it through the sound system in a way that sounds like what's coming out of them naturally. And it never sounds natural because the mic is never like pointed right in front of them. It's somewhere else on their head, and that sound is wrapping around their head in some weird way, and it's causing this weird frequency response.
So you're adjusting EQ for like opening? Like how long was your...
I'm still doing it on ragtime. I'm sitting up in the balcony tweaking EQs, trying to get this right, because we had a very short tech. Normally, once it opened, I would leave it. But yeah, I tweak them constantly, trying to get, because the actor will move the mic sometimes, especially the class thing that happens is I spend all week, I get it perfect. Then we get to dress rehearsal, and the actors put the mic in a different spot because now they're in costume and whatever, and they don't tell anybody, and they move it. And it's like, what the crap? What happened to the mic, you know?
So you don't have like a particular like EQ session where you go through with actors and EQ, you do it
I find that's a complete waste of time.
because they never do it the way they're supposed to.
Yeah. And so I just do it as we go. Every time they start talking,
Separate from the board.
yeah, when we hold for a light cue and they're just standing there anyway, I'll just say, hey, just go do the scene while I EQ, while we're waiting for just don't move, stay where you are. And they'll just talk or sing or whatever, and I'll sit there, I'll EQ, and I'll dial in the compressors and all that kind of stuff, and we'll get it going. Because I got to get what's coming out of that sound system to sound like what's coming out of them. If I can't make that happen, none of this works. So those are the three things. Remember, the time difference has to be within 5 to 30 milliseconds. If it's less than 5 milliseconds, it sounds like it's cone filtering. If it's more than 30 milliseconds, it sounds like it's echoing. Second thing, each arrival of sound cannot be more than 10 dB louder than the arrival that preceded it. Ideally, you can't always get that. But third rule, what's coming out of the loudspeaker has to sound like what's coming out of that actor. And if you can achieve all three of those things at the same time, it's brilliant. And you don't have to delay them every time they move. It'll work. As long as they stay within this area of the stage, it'll work.
How did you describe the 10 decibel rule again? I just like I understand it, but it's hard to like write down. You know what I'm saying?
So remember, we're solving this from the point of view of the listener. And the listener has several copies of the sound arriving at their ears at different times. And each arrival of sound cannot be more than 10 dB louder than the one that came before it. What's coming out of the sound system has to sound like what's coming out of the actor. Okay? If you can hit all three of those things, you'll be gold. Now, here's what happens now. I know that I can make this work as long as they are between these two spots on the stage. Because if it'll work when they're all the way downstage, and it'll work when they're in this upstage position, then it'll work everywhere in between. So what happens in the scenario where they're all the way up here against the back wall? Well, this is where I just add input delay to their channel. Okay, for that scene. For that scene, I'll just add extra delay, and that's effectively pushing the whole sound system further upstage behind them. I'll just do it for that scene, and then and then the next scene when they're downstage, I just take the delay off. Yeah. Yes, Jesse.
So for the purposes of doing that and for the, and for volume compensation, when you're trying to have everything get louder relative to itself, on the console, do you just send all of these things to one large mix or matrix, and then it kind of, when you raise that fader, it goes up relative to everything else? Or is there
Yeah, this is why I always want a console with a big matrix. Because what will happen is I'll create a bus, like a group bus that is just for my vocals, all right? And all the vocals go through that. And then that bus runs through a matrix that then gives me output level for each loudspeaker in the system. So I'll take that mix of voices and I'll say, okay, this much of it goes to the front fills, this much of it goes to the center cluster, this much of it goes to my delay fills. I might have under balcony delays, I might have balcony delays, I might have whatever. But I decide how much of that mix of sound goes to each loudspeaker, and I delay it at the output as well.
So
Yes.
are you, when you say that, do you mean, are you making channels, so like if you're looking at the soundboard, are you looking at channels that say like front fill whatevers, and then you're sending voice through that based on filter? No?
So at the input channel, I'm simply assigning that input to a group called vocals.
Okay.
Okay? That's all. So from the input point of view, that's all I'm doing. I'm saying vocals. Okay? And then from that group that has all the vocals in it, that feeds into the matrix. And at that point, I'm seeing individual outputs that represent individual loudspeaker systems: front fill, center cluster, balcony delays, under balcony delays, mix fill, all that kind of
So
stuff.
it's in the matrix. So when
Yeah.
you're mixing it, what does that look like? If you're sending,
When you're mixing it, you're just pushing a fader up.
so you're sending like fixed volume to everything?
I'm sending a fixed volume into a bus. And then the
Oh,
bus
okay.
distributes it out through the matrix to the different outputs at different levels and different times.
So when, no, it's okay. So when you're assigning it, you're starting at the matrix, or you're starting at the bus?
The
This-
matrix is last. Like,
So this is
in the flow.
I accomplish this, all of this spreadsheet gets accomplished in the matrix. Okay? And then I know that if I just send sound into that matrix, then it will distribute it out to all the loudspeakers at the right time and the right level. Okay? So all I'm doing is sending sound into a bus. Right? So I solve that matrix thing once, and then I never look at it again. I then just mix the show. And I just assign all those inputs to that bus that then sends it out to the matrix, and I just mix. Yes?
So matrix is that chart where you fill in like the blanks where it has like infinite and stuff.
Yeah.
You fill that out through milliseconds, not dB.
Let me show you. I can show it to you on the
Yeah, I
ragtime
was gonna
file.
say, you have like a visual.
Yeah. Let's see. You'll have to go virtual Dimitri here.
Drawing that thing for headers,
Right.
and I understood it then, but it's been some time.
So
I understand it now.
here goes. Let me open up the ragtime file, shall I? Where are you? There it is. Okay. So here's all the. Oh, let me hang on.
That's a lot of keys.
Okay, there we go. So I have these are all of the 24 wireless we're using, and I have them all assigned to group 1. Okay. So if I go to my bus masters, here's group 1. I call it vocals. The nice thing about this is now I can move that up and down and take the whole mix up. So during tech, we had this down at -10. And then once we got the orchestra, I took it up to unity, okay, to give us some more gain. That way, Kelsey could start learning pickups and where faders needed to be, and that didn't have to change when we got the orchestra. I just like took the whole vocal mix up 10 dB, and she kept mixing the same way she'd always been mixing, okay? So that bus then goes out to this. Now look at here. Let me go to my output masters. Okay, so here's all my outputs. I've got center cluster, subwoofer, front fill. I've got a mix position fill for Kelsey, and then I've got overhead monitors for the cast. I've got a stage manager, spot monitor, surrounds. Okay, so
Assign those to a bus?
no. So these are these. Now look at the center cluster. If I look in the processing here, I've got 8 milliseconds of delay on the center cluster. I have no milliseconds of delay on the front fills. And you're thinking, wait a minute, Jason, you got the front fills. Just hang on there. On the mixed position fill, which is all the way in the back of the house, I've got 80 milliseconds of delay on that. Okay? So that's where the delay is. Now, if I look at the matrix, here's the matrix. On the left column are all my buses. Or on the left, all these rows are my buses, and all the columns across the top are my outputs. So my vocal bus, I'm sending to the center cluster at minus 9 dB. I'm sending to the sub at minus 26. Front fills at unity, mixed position fill at minus 20.
I didn't know you could change the amount of dB you're sending to the matrix. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, that is the whole point of a matrix.
I
Yes.
totally thought it was just like assigning outputs. Okay.
Nope. So I'm doing that. And then what I did is on this vocal bus, I added 25 milliseconds of delay. So,
Oh, that makes sense.
so I,
The actual bus itself.
yep. So I delayed the center cluster so it imaged to the front fills. And then I delayed the mixed position fill so it imaged to the center cluster. And then I just put delay on the vocal bus, which pushed that whole thing that images to each other. I pushed the whole thing behind the actors, 25 feet behind the actors, and then it works. And I've been playing with that throughout the week. I started with 20 milliseconds, and I ended up adding 5 milliseconds by the end of tech to keep pushing the system up farther because they play so far upstage on this a lot.
And then if you wanted to do like, so say that chance that the actors aren't in that little space and they're all the way up here,
Yeah.
you would add a different bus to a different queue.
No, all I would do is I would just go to this mic and I would say, give me extra delay on that mic because they're standing further upstage.
Can you go back
And
to
you would
the-
do that manually during the show?
Yeah,
Can you go back to the matrix really quick?
yeah.
So your buses are being made based on what kind of grouping? Vocals,
I have a vocals. I have a group for the subwoofer because I want to be able to send something directly to subs sometimes. I've got surrounds. I've got what's called the floor, which is the floor mics because I have 3 floor mics. So I have a separate thing for that. And if you look at the floor mic bus, let's see. There it is. I don't have any delay on that because they're far away from the floor mics already. So their voice already travels to the edge of the stage. And the floor mics are where the front fills are. So their voice already travels through the air, hits the floor mics, perfectly, right? So I don't need to delay those, right? So those have no delay, but then they go through the system in a similar way.
So you're choosing what to make. Buses are on this axis, right?
Yeah.
You're choosing to make your buses just based on what you need to send it? Does it change for each show? Or like a basic, like you want, obviously want vocals for a bus?
Well, I also have my auxes here, and those are different. So I've got like a bus for vocal reverb, ghost reverb, vocal monitoring. So anybody that needs to hear vocals through a monitor, I've got a special aux for that. Anybody that needs to hear orchestra through monitoring, I've got an aux for that. I've got a special aux that sends straight to the mix position fill, so I can overcome Kelsey's bias in the mix. If I need to send something more to her because she naturally wants to hear that louder, I can do that. I've got a special front fill aux that if I need to send extra stuff to the front fills, I can. So that's how I'm using.
So for Mother Tongue, Bella was doing this with reverb, but she still put reverb in like a separate channel to apply. If that makes sense, like she still put like a reverb thing like in the matrix, but then she made it an individual channel that says reverb, and that way when you put that up, it sends to all the speakers. So you do this, and then you just assign it based on the channel.
Well, so reverb is
Because there's a lot of different ways to add reverb to it if it has the effect in this board, right?
well, no, but reverb there's a routing thing that happens with the reverb because you're sending a mix of the sound out to a reverb processor, then back into the console, and then out to the loudspeakers. Okay, so here's my vocal reverb aux. So I'm sending a little bit of each channel into that vocal reverb aux. Okay, and then if I look at that aux, I've got an aux matrix for that. And you can see I've got vocal reverb going out to an aux output called vocal reverb. Okay, so I've got aux masters here. So I have 2 outputs in my system that are vocal reverb and ghost reverb. Those are physical outputs, and there's no reverb on that. It's just a mix of all the vocals. That goes into a reverb processor, gets reverbed, comes out of the reverb processor, and that reverbed sound now.
Is that processor in the board? Or
No,
is it separate?
it's
So you have,
outboard.
You have a rack next to your
Yeah,
board?
yeah. So that reverb then comes back into the console somewhere. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Oh, my channels are out of order. But here's reverb left, here's reverb right. So that's coming from the reverb processor to inputs on the console. And from there, I'm routing it to group bus 3 and 4. And then here in my matrix, here's 3 and 4, and I'm routing that out to the surrounds. Okay?
So those little numbers on each channel, those are the numbers of your buses.
Yeah.
So it's like, so you know what that channel is based on what little number you have put?
Yeah.
So like, in the same way I would mix my music, I would create buses like this, except to go for a sound system, and
Yeah.
then I would do the matrix in order to assign the dB.
Exactly. Yes. There you go. All right. There's your crash course in precedence imaging. Now you need to go do it. So if you look on the canvas, there's an assignment for everybody but Jaden, which is the undergraduate one.
Everybody except you.
You're going to do Friedman Theater. I'm giving you the CAD file for it. Okay. And you're going to figure out, I believe it's just front fills and a center cluster. Okay. And then Jaden, I'm going to make you do a little bit extra thinking. And you're going to do Stevens Center, which is what I just did, but we're going to add under balcony fills and balcony fills.
Oh Lord.
Okay, so you got 2 more loudspeakers you have to make work into this equation. Okay,
Can we try it if we're not a graduate student?
if you want to, sure. So I want the spreadsheet. I want the spreadsheet showing your calculations. That's the only thing I need, because I know you're all starting with the same CAD file, so I don't need that.
Do you want to show you our equations, or do you just want the numbers how you did it on here?
I mean, if you can put the equations in the cells, then that way if it's wrong, I can check your equation and see where you went wrong. If you're just putting raw numbers in there, I don't know what you did wrong.
Yeah, that way
So-
you can tell us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So really just we're trying to find a magic number to
Yeah.